I'm Martin Mendoza. I'm the director of the Extramural Research Program at the Office of Minority Health at the FDA. And today we just want to give you a perspective on an FDA perspective on clinical trial inclusion and demographics challenges and opportunities. So before we get started, next slide, please. A bit of disclosure information. So I'm not going to discuss any off-label use or investigational use in this presentation. The views expressed here are my own, not necessarily that of FDA. And unfortunately, I have no financial relationships to disclose. So for anyone not familiar with FDA, I'm just going to give you a very, very brief overview of our mission. So FDA is responsible for protecting the public health by assuring safety and efficacy and security of drugs, biologics, and medical devices in our nation's food supply. We oversee a products worth over $2 trillion per year that account for approximately 1/5 of our nation's economy. We help the public get accurate, science-based information that they need for how to use medicines. We regulate the manufacturing, marketing, and distribution of tobacco products. That's something relatively new that we inherited or that we started regulating around 2009, 2010. We ensure the security of the nation's food supply, and we ensure the security of the nation's food supply. Next slide, please. So I want to touch a bit on, next slide, please, on globalization. And this is important for later in the talk. So about 10 to 15% of all food consumed by U.S. households is imported, and this has been increasing by about 10% per year last time we looked from 2005 to 2011. Medical devices, about 50% of all the devices, medical devices that we use in the U.S. are imported, and the last time we looked at this systematically, it was increasing by about 10% per year. And of course, 40% of the drugs on U.S. shelves come from overseas. And something that struck me when I started at the agency a couple years ago was that about 60%, potentially more greater, of the clinical data that's submitted to the U.S. that we evaluate is from outside the U.S. So very large amounts of globalization. Next slide, please. So minorities in clinical trials. Just want to build the case here for increased participation, and a lot of this has been already nicely covered by the panel today, so I won't spend too much time on it. Next slide, please. So when we look at minorities in clinical trials, and we break it down by industry trials and NIH clinical trials, you can see that African Americans have relatively low inclusion numbers, especially in the industry clinical trials, and you see similar numbers, even lower numbers with Hispanics, especially when compared to the demographics of the U.S. population. Next slide, please. Nope. Sorry, can you go back one? I think we may have skipped ahead. Nope, one more. Nope, wrong direction. One more. There we go. Okay, so overview of demographic inclusion. So similar to the last slide, if we look at some of the other racial groups, African Americans and Asians represent very small portions of clinical trial inclusion, especially when compared to the overall U.S. population. Next slide, please. Now, this slide struck me when I saw this data. So if you recall earlier, I was talking about globalization, and here's why it's important. So one study took a look at the percentage of patients enrolled in prostate cancer clinical trials and did it in two periods, from 93 to 2004 and then 2006 through 2014. And you can see that from the first time period, about half of those participants that enrolled in prostate cancer clinical trials were at U.S. sites. But then when we look at our later time point, that number moves down to less than a third. And so this is important because you want patients that represent the people that are going to use your medical products in your clinical trials. So if we're having more and more participants come from outside the U.S., well, the drugs that we're approving are for patients that are inside the U.S. They're U.S. citizens and residents. And then you can see for the other territories and countries how their percentages move up when you look at the second time period. So very important to realize this trend. Next slide, please. So why is participation important? The panel covered this nicely earlier, but just to reiterate, we need representation to study the effects of medical products in the people who will ultimately need them. Minorities may respond differently to medical products, cancer treatments, heart failure medications. These are all documented examples of differential effects. And obviously, we have health disparities that continue to exist. Next slide, please. And again, this was also covered by the panel earlier. Reasons for decreased participation. There's historical mistrust, inadequate recruitment and retention efforts, misunderstanding of minorities' beliefs and values that contribute to their decision-making process. There's a perception by some that minorities are ineligible for enrollment or that minorities do not want to participate, which we know is just not true. There's a lack of awareness on the patient's part, and as was mentioned earlier by one of the earlier panelists, physicians may not talk to their patients about clinical trials. Next slide, please. So when we look at the actual research as to why minorities and their participation in clinical trials, in general, we can see what has already been discussed earlier today is that minorities will participate if they're asked. So, for example, 91% of African Americans that were surveyed in one study would consider participating in a clinical trial. And that they felt the mistrust was becoming less of an issue. Among Latinos, 70% of those surveyed knew what a clinical trial was and would also consider participating in the trial. As I just mentioned earlier, minorities, they will participate if they're asked, but oftentimes they're just not. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about my office, the FDA Office of Minority Health, and how we've engaged in this effort. One of our main purposes is we want to make sure that minorities have the information they need in a way that they can understand it to make informed health decisions. Next slide, please. The Office of Minority Health, our vision is to create a world where health equity is a reality for all. Next slide, please. And specifically, our mission is to promote and protect the health of diverse populations. And we do this through research and communication of regulatory science that addresses health disparities. And the key here is that we focus our efforts within the regulatory framework, which makes us unique from other health and human service agencies like NIH or CDC or CMS. Next slide, please. So our office has three primary goals. We aim to improve and strengthen regulatory science, informing the research and evaluation of subpopulation data associations. We look to strengthen FDA's capacity to address minority health and health disparities across the agency. And our third and final goal is promote effective communication and the dissemination of information to the public, particularly those underserved populations. Next slide, please. So the way that we go about accomplishing these three goals in our mission and our vision, and specifically with regards to the Diversity in Clinical Trials initiative, are two main pathways, communications and policy. So I'm going to touch on both of those today. So let's get started with communications. Next slide, please. So OMH, the Office of Minority Health at FDA, acts as conveners and connectors. So what do I mean by that? We connect the FDA centers and offices, which is those centers and offices that primarily interact with medical product sponsors like Pfizer, Merck. We connect them to minority-serving organizations, which are the conduit to patients, consumers. So it's our job to know that these minority organizations, such as FAN, and develop relationships with them and help connect them to FDA. Next slide, please. We have several outreach and communication strategies to accomplish this. We use stakeholder engagement. We raise awareness through our website, newsletter and email blasts, social media. We have targeted consumer education with various targeted disease campaigns. And we translate and adapt materials so that underserved populations have the information they need in a language and manner that's easy and able for them to understand. Next slide, please. So as mentioned earlier, FDA in 2016 had something called the Year of Clinical Trial Diversity, which was spearheaded by our former commissioner, Dr. Califf. And so the purpose of this campaign was to develop a multimedia campaign to raise awareness around the importance of minority representation in clinical trials, to ensure medical products are safe and effective for everyone. And even though it was technically 2016, the Year of Clinical Trial Diversity, these efforts have not ceased, and they're very much ongoing as they should be. Next slide, please. So our motivators for our campaign, we wanted to add positive reinforcement as to why clinical trial diversity matters, no stranger to this group, educate consumers about clinical trials, and help stimulate dialogue among peers and patient providers. Next slide, please. So our campaign materials consisted of several components. We had several YouTube videos featuring public service announcements. We developed print materials, brochures, fact sheets, blogs, newsletters. We were active on social media, with Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest. We have a web page, a website on the FDA bigger website. And we also developed a stakeholder communications tool, which is freely available to the public, anyone who would like to download that. Next slide, please. The second arm of our office that was devoted to minorities in clinical trials has to do with policy. So next slide, please. So one piece of legislation that has greatly informed our work is known as the FDA Safety and Innovation Act, FDASIA for short, of 2012, and specifically Section 907. So the history to this piece of legislation, and I promise I'll keep this brief, is that we had a lot of these advocates lobby Congress, and they asked Congress to require FDA to publicly report data on inclusion and analysis of women and minorities on the applications that medical product sponsors send to us. And then Maryland Senator Benjamin Cardin asked for the report to contain information on race and ethnicity. So under that legislation, which reauthorized FDA fees, which are crucial to FDA's function, it included a requirement for this initial report, a public report, which is available on our website, on inclusion data from these medical product applications, as well as an action plan to address any deficiencies that report identified. Next slide, please. So in August of 2013, we released that report as required by Congress. And what this report showed, which I'm sure is no secret to this group here, is that the inclusion rates from the clinical trial data that's submitted to FDA for minorities is rather low. So as part of that FDASIA legislation that I mentioned on the previous slide, Congress also required us to develop an action plan that will address the deficiencies that this report brought to light. Next slide, please. So in August of 2014, FDA issued what's called the FDASIA Section 907 Action Plan. And there were three priorities that headlined this particular report. Priority one focused on data quality, so improving the completeness and quality of demographic subgroup data collection. Priority two focused on participation, so identifying barriers to subgroup enrollment in clinical trials. And priority three focused on transparency in making demographic subgroup data more available and transparent. So next slide, please. So under priority one, data quality, we issued an FDA guidance document. And for anyone not familiar with what FDA guidance documents are, these are documents issued by FDA. They are not law, but they are guidances that let industry know, regulated industry know what FDA's particular thinking or is on a particular subject or policy. In this FDA guidance document is some important information that I wanted to highlight. Next slide, please. So the guidance document talks about clinically relevant enrollment, and that's really important to me and to this group as well. So this document states that it's FDA's expectation that sponsors will enroll participants that reflect the demographics for clinically relevant populations with regard to age, gender, race, and ethnicity. So basically mirror the disease prevalence. And very importantly is the second bullet point, which I want to talk about for just a second here. So this is new language that has never been included before by FDA. It's something that medical product sponsors, I think, should really pay attention to. So this statement in our guidance document specifically states that a plan to address inclusion of clinically relevant subpopulations should be submitted for discussion to FDA at the earliest phase of sponsors' clinical trial development. So this means that for drugs and biologics, no later than the end of the phase 2 meeting. Previously, this was not a formal part of sponsor meetings with FDA. And so now FDA is explicitly recommending that sponsors are expected to discuss a plan for inclusion of the appropriate populations when they come to meet with the FDA regarding their clinical trials. Next slide, please. So just to summarize what I talked about today, we talked about the why minority participation in clinical trials is important. We talked about FDA OMH's outreach campaign and our policy efforts to increase diverse participation in clinical trials. Next slide, please. I encourage you to stay connected with us. Please follow us on Twitter. You can email us, visit our website, and we also hold numerous webinars and stakeholder calls. And next slide, please. I'm happy taking questions, and please feel free to email me directly as well.